Hey, I'm Dr. Brennan Roach, and welcome to another episode of a virtual tour of the Holy Land. And we're going to be having another look at Tel Dan today. In our last episode, we looked at the holy place, the temple, and this time we're going to have a look at what is known as the Israel Gate. So this is another really fascinating part of Tel Dan. It's another fascinating part of what God is actually doing and has done there in the biblical site. So I welcome you to a virtual tour of the Holy Land. We're going to the Israel Gate at Tel Dan, the place of meeting. The oldest version of the Bible had a little palace where he could stop overnight. Whoever interprets the dream has incredible power. If you're going from Jerusalem to Jericho or vice versa, you stop somewhere here and rest overnight. Near the caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. This is actually a pagan type place. A very likely place where Peter preached his first sermon. Some very significant, important events happen at this location. Well, welcome to another episode of a virtual tour of the Holy Land. And as I said in our introduction, we're going to be looking at the Israelite Gate at Tel Dan, the place of meeting. Now, as we spoke about last week, Tel Dan is an important city in the north of Israel, right up on the border, an extremely fertile region. It was a gateway. It was a place where many temples were built over the years because it was an incredibly rich and fertile region, which meant wealth and prosperity. It was part of the food bowl for the whole of Israel and the surrounding regions. So it was incredibly important, and caravans would come through there, trade would go through there, creating a lot of wealth and a lot of importance. It was a place of significance, and it was very close to Mount Hermon, and it was also very close to Caesarea Phillipi, which we looked at in the last couple of episodes. The Israelite Gate at Tel Dan was a place of meeting, it was a place of worship, and it was a place of business. So let's review our journey so far. So in this season, we've looked at Caesarea Philippi, the place of the source of the Jordan River. We've looked at Mount Hermon, the place of transformation. And we looked last time at the temple at Tel Dan being the place of control, where the northern kings sought to exert control over the people from the 10 northern tribes. And today we are going to still be in Tel Dan, and we're going to be visiting another really important site, and that's the Israelite Gate, the place of meeting. So as we sort of continue on, we go and we have a look at where we are, and we can see again that we're clustered up right on that northern border, the modern border of Lebanon, and all of those three sites are very close to one another. My map doesn't actually do it justice. For instance, Caesarea Philippi, depending on where you walk from, is maybe anywhere from a 4 to 5 kilometer walk between the two locations. So both sites were very important at different points in time, and different places were the actual city or the important place of that region. Old Testament time, which we're now talking about here, the major city was found at Tel Dan. Now, this is a great view from the back of Tel Dan looking across to Mount Hermon. So that gives you a really good idea of how close we're talking about. And if you sort of head around to the sort of to the northern side of Tel Dan, you actually then as a walking path, and you can walk straight between Caesarea Philippi and Tel Dan itself. And we've got the map, and on the map we've got highlighted the two locations in Tel Dan. This is part of a nature reserve. People go there for holidays, for picnics, just to enjoy it. It's such a lush part of Israel. There's a lot of water. There's greenery. There's a wading pool. It's just a great place to go for hikes, and it's just a fantastic location. There's lots of archaeological remains and artifacts, and we can see those two locations on the map. On the top left-hand side of the map, we've got the location there, the cultic site or the temple site, and on the right-hand side of the map, just down to the right from that, on the right-hand side of the map, we've got the Israelite Gate. So we can see there all the different parts and the places. This gives you a beautiful bird's eye view of the actual archaeological park, and you can see a walking trail around the outside of it. So today we're going to be having a look at the site, which is on the left-hand side of screen, and that's the gate. In our last episode, on the top right-hand side of the screen, you can see the lighter area there. That's where the cultic site was, or the temple site was. So it gives you a little bit of an idea. And here we come into the gate itself. So imagine that you're coming into the city. You need food for your animals. If you're a trader, you want a place to rest, or maybe you're coming there to actually sell and do your trade as the final destination here. You come into this courtyard area with these paved stones, which is the original paved stones from the period, and you come into the city. You come into the city gate there. So that gives you it's a really well reconstructed area. And that gives you a really good idea. And obviously, imagine the city walls and everything like that being quite a lot higher. Then we come into the reason why this is such a significant site. We can see here that this is the place of meeting. This is the seat where the person who is in charge, if the king was there, he was in charge, or one of his delegates was in charge. This would be the person who would be like the ruler of the city, or one of the important elders or rulers of the city, or like a council of elders of the city, would sit there and they would make determinations and decisions about who could come in, what gods were to be worshipped, how much money you would have to pay, and all those sort of things. They would even be a place for judgments, for lawsuits, and it was also just a general place of meeting. Let's meet at the front gate. And everybody knew that was a location. If you were coming from far away, you knew nothing about the city, you would say, we'll meet at the gate. And then people will come and get you from the city and bring you out to meet those people who were there. So it's quite a nice location now, with some shaded trees and things like that. And what you're actually seeing here is an actual reconstruction of the actual city gate as it would have looked like at that time. So notice that, I don't know if you can notice it or if you're aware of it, but it sort of starts to go on these right angles. So we were going down, and then we had to turn left, and now we're going straight, and we're going to turn left again, and then we're going to turn right. And this was sort of like these dog-legged sort of approaches into the gate of the city that ensured the city remained safe. So let's see, this is one of the chambers. So one of the things about the Israelite gates that were found all around Israel in different cities, where they all had these large chambers. Now, these chambers would be used for storing food, wheat, grain, wine, and different articles and valuables that would come in, and people would come in, and then there would be guards. So there'd be 2 chamber gates, 3 chamber gates, 4 chamber gates. And what that means is there was these chambers, and there's quite a large chamber that you can see there where goods were kept safe. So maybe you were bringing them and you were trading them, or you were selling them or buying. That's where all the produce. It also doubled as a fantastic defensive structure if the city was being attacked. So if they got through the initial gate, then another gate would drop, and they would be able to attack from these other chambers, and they'd have to get through that, go through another gate, chamber, go through another gate, chamber, depending on how many gates and chambers that it actually had. So these created, during wartime, extremely good defensive structures. Outside of wartime, it was used as a place of storage. And again, right next to the gate, so the people who were in control were able to then have soldiers or other people around those gates protecting the goods and the wealth of the city. So when are we? Good question. Glad you asked. So when are we? We're back in that time period. We're back around before 722 BC, where we see before the 10 northern tribes are captured by the Assyrians. So that's a really important time frame, really important time period. So as we're going through, we're just reminding ourselves again, the 10 northern tribes had set up their own temple, they'd set up their own worship, they'd separated themselves from Israel, from the southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin, and from Jerusalem as well. So they'd set themselves up as a different political entity, military structure, and then eventually that comes falling down around them, and eventually they're completely removed and taken off into captivity, which has caused a lot of speculation over the years. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not particularly interested in where the tribes ended up, and quite frankly, there's quite some strange ideas out that which are quite frankly just born out of imagination, not based anywhere within Scripture. The fact is, these 10 northern tribes were taken by the Assyrians, and they were quite simply assimilated. And of course, those people who were assimilated ended up all around the Assyrian Empire. But for all intents and purposes, they're gone from history, unfortunately. So the Israel that survives is from Judah and from Benjamin, and of course from those who are from the northern tribes who migrated down for protection during that time and somehow escaped. But I like to call this gate the place of meeting. In our earlier lessons about Jesus, we found that Jesus was entering the temple, and as he was entering the temple, he came across a person who was on the seat of power, the seat of Moses. And that person at that seat, if you remember, would say whether the offering was acceptable or not acceptable. So they had the money changers tables, they had the selling of sacrifices. Then you had this person there who was the power and the authority who would be able to determine if your sacrifice was valid or not. So the rulers of the city in the Old Testament times, they would sit in the seat of power, and they would call it the seat of Moses. They would sit in the seat of power, that being the guy they have given the God-given authority and right to make these decisions. So if we think about it in a modern context, it would be a bit like members of the royal family, the king, or it would be like the palace, or it would be like parliament, and the office of a prime minister or a president. So that's the sort of thing that we're talking about, and that's the sort of scene that we want to set as we start to have a little bit of a look and a little bit of a wander. And I've got a video which takes us from the entrance of Tel Dan National Park and makes its way through to the Israelite Gate area. And I want to thank David Hermon, who produced this clip. So let's roll the video and let's have a look at what that is actually saying. So let's
So we're approaching the gate and the walls of the city of Dan from the 9th century BCE. In these excavations of the gates here, the entrance gate to Dan from the time of the Israelite kingdom. So there's this big kind of courtyard outside the gate, and this is really beautiful. Here you can see kind of a podium with 4 post holders that probably held some kind of canopy. And you can see in the design here, that is very possible how the king would welcome and greet the people. Okay? Yeah, and the king arose and sat in the gate, and all the people came before the king. And here we can see the king sitting at the gate and the people on him. And how wonderful is that? Is that seating area. Was found in the excavations just like this. Okay, remember I promised a surprise at the end. This is it. So the National Parks Authority arranged this beautiful pool for families and adults to walk in and enjoy the coolness of the water. So yeah, let's go in and check it out. Oh wow, this is great. It's refreshing. It's just us. There's a family there, family here. This is wonderful.
Back, and we find ourselves back in the time of the Israelite Gate, and it's a really nice site. There's another gate from an earlier period, a Canaanite gate, which we're not going to talk about because it doesn't really relate too much to the biblical accounts and stories. But there is so much to see and do. So if you go to Israel, make sure you go and visit Tel Dan. There is so much to be able to see. So what happened here? We can see some of the things of importance that happened here. We talked about the Tel Dan temple last week in our last episode, and tonight we're looking at the Israelite Gate. And so that's a really interesting part that we're actually looking at as we continue to study and go through this section of the Bible. Now, the Israelite Gate was a very important gate, and it was important because it's one of the best preserved gates that we actually have in Israel. So what it means is we can look at this gate and we can see what the gates of the city would have looked like, which is quite important, not just from an archaeological point of view, but for us understanding the Bible. The gates of the city are so important. And this is a lesson where we're going to be talking about the importance of the city gates. So the gates of an Old Testament city were the central point of the city, and understanding the functions of the city gate and what is around it and what happens at the city gate and how the inhabitants relate. And it tells us about the power structures and the city gates. The Israelite Gate is a perfect example of an Iron Age or an Old Testament gate, so that when we see it, once you hopefully you'll grab a hold of this. And once you're reading, particularly the Old Testament, and you'll see over and over and over again, they talk about the gates of the city. They met at the gates of the city. This happened at the gates of the city, over and over again. Why? And so understanding this will help you understand the politics and dynamic and what the biblical story is actually trying to show us and tell us at this point. Anyway, so we see that actually happened. So the Israelite tribe of Dan settled on the Canaanite city of Laish, which is, again, very close to Tel Dan, and at the end of the second millennium BCE. Okay, so right around the beginning of the biblical account. So Dan remained an Israelite city until the Assyrian armies of Tilgath-Pilshah III destroyed most of the kingdom of Israel, the 10 northern tribes. Okay, I know it's a bit confusing because it calls it Israel. So these are the northern tribes, the 10 northern tribes in late 730 BC. So the remains of the Israelite city are numerous, and what's particularly impressive is the remains around the gate complex, which we've actually seen and we've had a bit of a wander through in our lesson today. So there's a series of chamber gates and cobble streets and a winding, complicated defensive structure that was there and that was fairly important. So we have a look at the gates of the Israelite city and what was those important things that I've been telling you about? What are those important things that I've been sharing with you? Well, the gate was incredibly important. It was a place of power and influence. It was the center of political life. It was the center of legal life. It was where laws were made. It was the center of public life. And even to the simple things like it talks about the threshing floor. That's where the people would go and thresh the wheat. It was the center of trading, as we found people come and buy and sell and put those items and those articles inside the gates for safekeeping. And it was also at the city gate was always the god of the city. So you had to make an offering to the god of the city to be allowed into the city. You know, it was very much a respect thing to you honor the god of that city if you wanted to enter into that city. So this was what was done as very commonplace. So as we talk about that, you can see on this slide, it's funny when I just entered this in. Sometimes different computer features will try and talk about the slide in a sort of background type of thing, which helps Google find the things, and I'm not going to go into that. But it just called this slide a pile of rocks, and it made me laugh a little bit. Called it a pile of rocks, which is, what does it look like? It looks like a pile of rocks. What else would it be? Well, if we have a look, and we can see right in the middle, there's sort of, I suppose, a dark brownish color stone, and some other stones beside it, like a white one, and some other stones there which are a bit smaller. And if we have a look at the one in the middle, which is that dark brownish color with a triangle pointy roof type structure on it, this is what we call a stela or a masaba. And this was a representation of the gods. So whatever the god was, and we don't know exactly what the god was, it was represented by these series of stones that we have across on this altar, which is there. So someone would have to come up, they would have to bring an offering, and they would have to lay it in front. And of course, the priests were there to collect the offering and to take it into the city. And so this was fairly typical in each one of the cities. So this is particularly interesting that it's part of. Remember last time we talked about the golden calf and the Egyptian gods and the Canaanite gods that were found in and around the temple. So this is also the god of the city. So you would not only be coming in here to worship at the temple, but first, before you could worship at the temple, you must offer a sacrifice to the god of the city. So there was just a whole lot of offerings. And so this is a place of fairly important spiritual power. But this is typical. The god at the gate of the city is typical of every single city had a god there. And this was a fairly typical representation. In some of the other places, they would have it would be more elaborate, more carved. Sometimes it would just be a simple structure of a stone. And we imagine there would be some other items there that would make it clear as to what was actually happening with the stone itself. So the next thing we see is that the gate was also the center of public life. And when we have a look at the different scriptures and the different texts, we have a great example of this that we find in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 1. All the people assembled with a unified purpose at the square just inside the water gate. They asked Ezra, the scribe, to bring out the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had given Israel to obey. So it's the people are meeting there with purpose. Ezra's come, the book of the law of Moses is coming, and all the people are gathering there as a really important. This is it's not happening in the temple, as you could imagine. It's not happening in what we would think of a church or a synagogue or a meeting place. It's actually happening in the open of the city gate. So that's a really important part of what's actually going. And if we understand that, it really helps us understand what the Bible is teaching. We also have a center of legal and business life. Now, lawsuits were routinely conducted at the city gate for several reasons. It was a natural place for the witnesses to assemble. It was also a public place, so any legal disputes would be resolved in a public manner so that everybody who was a party to the legal dispute, not only would they have fairness of the outcome, but everybody who was watching would know the outcome as well. So that means it can't comes like in our courts of law, someone comes out and they might say, well, this happened in the court. Well, you can't do that. It's completely open and everybody can certainly see what's going on. It also was close to the altar of the gods that was there. And it was very commonplace. We see this other parts of scripture about taking oath. So when you were making your testimony, when you were making your presentation, you would also be making oath in front of that God, that if you didn't tell the truth, then you were then subject to punishment by that God and the God of that city. So again, that was a fairly important part of public life and law cases and legal hearings that would go on. So the gateway of the Israelites was found in the gateway, the Israelite cities, were public places of hearings, legal transaction, and business. And we see several scriptures there that refer to that. It's also the elders, the judges, or the king might sit in that place of judgment, where we're actually sitting there on that seat. I want to call it a throne, but they wouldn't think of it as a throne. They would see it as the next slide says, that place of power and influence. So 1 Kings chapter 22 verse 10 says, King Ahab of Israel and King Jehoshaphat of Judah, dressed in their royal robes, were sitting on the thrones of the threshing floors near the gate of Samaria. And all of Ahab's prophets were prophesying in front of them. So again, we see the dynamics that's going on there. Prophets and teachers are delivering their messages at the gate. So you think about Jesus, where do we find him teaching? We find him teaching at the gate of the city of Capernaum and many other gates of other cities that he was part of, because that's where the crowds would come, and they would come to these activities and be part of it. There were markets that were conducted there. There were law judgments. The king sometimes held public audiences, and the gates were used for the legal tribunals and at the seat of the gates and among the elders. And the other really interesting thing was that if there was oppression at the gate, if you come across that phrase, oppression at the gate in the Bible, that means there was corruption, that whatever the system, whoever the ruler was, that system and that process was corrupt. It also meant that it was incredibly easy to overcome with actual physical power, which we saw at Gomorrah, Sodom and Gomorrah, when we talked about those. We go back to season 1, and you can see a little bit more about Sodom and Gomorrah in detail and what happened at those gates when the crowd became unruly and tried to take control. So the seat of power, the city gate, was also a seat of power and a power of influence in the city. As 2 Samuel chapter 15 verse 2 says, he got up early in the morning and went out to the gate of the city when people brought a case to the king for judgment. Absalom would ask where in Israel they were from, and they would tell him their tribe. Proverbs chapter 31 verse 23 said, her husband is well known at the city gates where he sits with the other civic leaders. So it's sort of like quite often a communal sort of thing. It's not just one person, but quite often it's this idea of a committee or a structure or a group of elders, like the Sanhedrin, like the wisdom of the elders collectively coming together to also make decisions. So if you're part of that group, if you're part of that committee, then you were part of the power group that was actually able to influence what was happening there. So let's have a look at the next one. It was a place of meeting, which is, of course, what I've called Tel Dan and the Israelite Gate as a place of meeting. So if we sum it up as one big idea, this is where everybody came to meet. They came to meet for business. They came to meet for social. They came to meet for legal. They came to meet for trade. They came to hang out. They came to listen to the teaching and the prophets and have a look at the king passing by and what was he going to say today. So it was a place of meeting where there was lots of things that were going on, and it was also a place where Boaz was. So it tells us a lot about Boaz and his importance. So again, when we're thinking about the story of the book of Ruth, and it says Boaz went to the town gate, okay? And he took a seat there. So it tells us that Boaz isn't this run-of-the-mill individual, but Boaz is a person of wealth, power, influence, and importance in the town. So let's have a look and see what it says specifically about Boaz in Ruth chapter 4, verse 1. Boaz went into the town gate and took a seat there. Just then, the family redeemer he had mentioned came by. So Boaz called out to him, come over here and sit down, friend. I want to talk to you. So they sat down together. So that's a nice, polite way saying Boaz was saying to the kinsman redeemer, I need you to come over here. We're going to make a decision about this. It's not a private conversation. We're come together. We're going to make a decision. We're going to meet together, and we're going to make a final, legal, and appropriate decision as to what is going to happen to Ruth. So we come towards the end of our our lesson today, and we see that the gates of the city was a place of meeting, of power, of influence, of trade. Whatever the gates of the city are mentioned, it is implied that it is something more than just a physical gate. When we think about a gate to a city, we just think about something that has to be opened and closed when we're driving our car through or when we're walking through as pedestrians. But when the Bible talks about the gate of the city, it's talking about that place of meeting, power, and influence. In other words, it's actually telling us that whatever is happening in this moment doesn't get any more important because it is actually happening at the gate of the city. So, what are the lessons that we can take away from that? The city gate is a place of meeting, and whoever controls the city gate controls the city. In other words, which God is going to be worshipped, what commerce is going to happen, what taxes, what tolls are going to have to be paid, who is the political power and influence, who's in control of this city. And the military strength of that city is always found around the gate. How big is the gate? How strong is the gate? How many soldiers are around the gate? How much is protecting the gate? How many guards are surrounding the gate? Who's protecting the offering? So it's about the strength. So this is a physical representation, a military representation, an economic representation, a spiritual representation of the strength and the power of that city. So, of course, the larger the city, the more powerful that city was to become. So just in finishing up our lesson here on Tel Dan, our final lesson about the Israelite Gate, it's the place of meeting. The city gate it's the place of meeting. However, when we think about the city gate, it's no longer like that, but we have to understand the same principle that this is the place of meeting. And now for us, the city gate is not one location entering into a city, but it's actually spread throughout our cities. However, unless the worship of the one true God is found at the city gate, at the entrance of the city, in the heart of the city, then we will see that it is other powers and other forces that are actually in control. So if we control the city gate, we influence. If somebody else controls the city gate, they influence the worship, the business, the economics of the city, and then we have to do the best we can to live and be part of that society and culture. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the lesson on Tel Dan and the other lesson on Tel Dan with the temple and this lesson on the Israelite Gate. Just grab a hold of, so next time you read in the Bible and it says they were at the gate, just remember this teaching and remember how powerful, important a city gate was. I'm Dr. Brennan Roach, the founder of Acts Bible College. God bless you. See you later. See you next time. And I hope you enjoy being with us. Thank you for watching.